start. Just some basics first of all. I'm Councillor Maney and I'm the chair of the committee this evening. And I'd just like to remind everybody present at the meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the council's website. So item 1 is to receive apologies for absence.
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Jones and Councillor Fox.
Thank you. Okay, so we move on to the minutes. At item 2, I move that the minutes of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny meeting of the 14th of January 2025 be approved as a correct record. Are the minutes agreed, or are there any comments? Councillor Kent?
Sorry, Chair. On page 7, we've gone to Grange Waters. We had a conversation with the portfolio holder about Grange Waters still being on the asset register, and it was going to be looked at to be removed. Just wondered if we have an update, because as we've got this in the minutes, it would be nice to have it minuted that it has been taken off the list as and when that decision is made. I didn't know if you'd had any update to give us, Chair.
Okay, can anybody comment on that? No, it doesn't look like they can. Yeah, Lucy?
We can take that away as an action, Councillor Kent, and we can give you an update as soon as possible.
Yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. Would that be okay for the update to be recorded officially? So, because this is in the minutes that it's going to come off the list, and I think with the way the pace of the council at the moment and new things coming on board and the government sort of devolution and all that, so we need to make sure the list is up to date. So I'd like it, if possible, to be minuted that if that decision's made, it's removed, that we confirm through the minutes that it has been removed.
I think we can certainly ask for clarification on that. It's not so much an issue on the accuracy of the minutes. That was said. It just doesn't appear to have happened yet. So the minutes aren't inaccurate, but it would, in light of Councillor Kent's comments, if we could get a written update on that, it would be helpful. Does that satisfy your query?
Yes, Chair. Yes,
so, having heard those comments, are we happy with the accuracy of the minutes and can we approve them? Agreed? Thank you. Okay, item 3. Do any members have any declarations of interest? There are none from me. No, thank you. So no declarations of interest. So there are there's 3 briefing papers at item 3, 4 and 5. I'm going to change the order of the agenda because we have the Deputy Leader of the Council here who's presenting a report. I know she's got some commitments that she needs to get to as soon as possible. So we're going to move the portfolio holder report to the front, if that's okay, Councillor Worrell? Yeah? Okay, so I'll hand over to you then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I acknowledge that many of the topics covered in my report have already been considered by this committee. So before I walk you through the key highlights of the report, I want to take this moment to formally thank the committee for the thorough and constructive scrutiny you have provided on these matters. Your work, of course, plays a crucial role in ensuring the necessary checks and measures and balances are in place, helping the council to operate as it should and as our residents expect us to. I recognise that much of my portfolio is also a shared responsibility amongst all 49 of us as councillors, and my role is simply to act as a steward, working to keep us all on track as we navigate our way through and beyond intervention. While we have made some significant progress, there is still work to do before we can demonstrate that we are ready to regain full control of the day-to-day decisions that impact the residents of Thurrock. Now, I just want to take you on a quick look through the report in each section and to pick up some key highlights. So, the corporate plan and PMAP, I'm going to cover these two together. So, the corporate plan for Thurrock Council was unanimously agreed in Council in July and is a 5-year plan. It will not sit on a shelf, as we said it wouldn't, and each year we will produce an annual report for Council detailing our progress against that plan. It's not statutory for us to have a corporate plan, but it was something that will keep us focused and will pick up all of the recommendations from the Best Value report. PMAF gives us a good insight into how we are performing across all service areas, and any slippage can easily be tracked and the necessary actions put in place. I've spoken to all Cabinet members and asked them to review all areas of delivery to ensure we are measuring the right activities and that the targets are appropriately challenged, neither too ambitious nor too lenient. I expect that over the next year we will see new measures added to the scorecard. Personally, I want to see some around devolution and LGR, and I've already asked officers for us to be able to put this into the new measures when we finish this year, and so they'll start to come in from the next year. We simply can't just add things willy-nilly as we go through a year. You know, we have to wait for the full year to be able to do that. Cabinet will now meet regularly into the next municipal year to look in depth at all of the performance measures and refer to scrutiny any areas that they would like the committee to look at. And of course, this committee can always ask to see something looked at in depth and to take on that piece of work. So moving on to improvement and recovery, we have made some significant progress and as acknowledged in the recently published report, and there is much to welcome as we continue through the intervention process. Notably, the new scrutiny process is proving effective. We have seen recommendations being made to Cabinet, albeit just from this committee, so well done. And task and finish reports are on this week's Cabinet agenda. I can't recall a time in recent years where we have seen this happen. The constitutional rewrite is ongoing, although it has been more complex than we anticipated to untangle the various chapters. However, with dedication and cross-party working again, we are making steady progress with key sections including the role of the council, scrutiny and standards have already been completed and been agreed by council. Progress on the risk register has been slower, but Councillor Muldowney and officers have it firmly within their scope, ensuring oversight of risk across all service areas. We must also be mindful that the improvement report highlights concerns around the conduct of a small cohort of councillors. Without a significant shift in their approach, we struggle to make the progress needed for intervention measures to be eased. And this is something that really does worry me, and it is picked up regularly with commissioners, with the leaders. So the communication strategy is already delivering some excellent results. E-News goes out to about 90,000 residents, and each week is packed full of stories from the council. Top stories each week regularly get over 1,000 click-throughs to important information on our website where residents can find out how they can access support or sign up to services or events. No surprises that clicks increase when it comes to bin collections, with 3,800 residents linked to e-news direct to the website to find out how the changes affected them in January. It's an incredibly effective way for us to reach our residents, and we have 16,000 Facebook followers now. So if everybody started to say, keep sharing Thurrock Council stuff, you know, it'd be nice if we get to next year and we're saying we've got 20,000 Facebook followers. So a combination of social media, resident e-news and an effective mail out drove over around 10,000 visits to our bin collection page over a few days in February as changes of routes came into effect, and nearly 10,000 visits to our Thurrock Cares web area. Almost 4,600 residents came to find information and support about the cost of living. The most popular pages were those offering advice for help with food, financial help and where to find warm spaces. And before moving on, can I just say again a thank you to this committee for the work that you completed shaping the comms strategy. I know that the team appreciated your feedback. So moving on to governance and DEM services, this year we have implemented the new overview and scrutiny arrangements and split the audit and standards committee into two separate committees. As promised, we are in the process of now reviewing how well those changes have worked. I met with CFGS last week, who were carrying out the review for us, and I believe that they've also met with chairs, senior officers and partners. There was an all-member questionnaire, so I'm hoping that you all did take part and completed that. So the next step is a comprehensive report which will be produced, and any new changes could see improvements which will be actioned in the new year. We've seen a real improvement in the decision-making process with the new standard report using ModGov templates and inclusion of risk implications when considering all papers that go to Cabinet. So thank you to all those councillors that have been to the training this year. Cross-party attendance makes a difference to actual training event and in turn improves the knowledge of the elected members. It's been noted by commissioners that there is generally the same councillors who attend these events. So with this in mind, there's a new member approach for training and development, and this is currently being agreed with leaders and will start with the training day early in May. So please, again, try to be there. One thing that I did pick up, and it was from watching this, because although I haven't been at this meeting, I do still watch it, and that is that several of the reports, it was picked up that they come quite late, sometimes with just a couple of days to read them, and sometimes just a couple of hours. So I've raised this with commissioners, and we'll be picking this up going forwards. Told you we've done a lot this year. Elections, it feels like forever and ever ago, but with just a small team, we've supported the local elections, and just 6 weeks' notice, we held a general election. So that was amazing work from the team. And again, I'd like to also highlight the cross-party work that was done on the Boundary Commission and the polling district review. And it really has been a busy year for Councillor Maney, who also led the corporate meeting for the budget. So thank you, Councillor Maney. It's not gone unnoticed that you've been a very, very, very good chair. Legal have had a busy year, so we're moving away from our agreement with Barking and Dagenham and to bring a lot of the work back in-house. We will still have to have some external work, but as much that we can do inside, it really should be done inside. And we've recently recruited 3 trainee solicitors from internal. So again, excellent progression for our own staff, and will benefit the council overall. I'd like to touch on customer and digital strategy, although I shared this service with Councillor Muldowney. So it's so she holds all of the procurement, all of the finances, and then I just pick it up at the point of delivery. So it's a shared, so our digital strategy was old. I think that for those of us that have been around for quite a while, we know that it did need renewing. So we've just about started this work really this year. And at the beginning of the year, we had 285 licences, but only 100 of them were being used. So some of these licences were actually available for free, but we were paying for them. So that's all been put straight. And we had 570 published phone lines, of which 80 were completely redundant, but still ringing, and nobody was ever going to be picking them up. So there's been a real reshaping of that work. We've recently launched our digital assistant, Amy. I've not had to use it yet, but I hear it's working well with council tax transactions and reducing a lot of the manual work. So, you know, it really is a move into a digital world. AI has also been introduced in social care to cut admin and already saved about £250,000, I read in a report. So overall, we've delivered about £1.2 million worth of savings in the digital area. So that is that one, and I am really, really nearly at the end. Obviously, we've got a small registry office here. It's well used, and a lot of people pass through it. It's never going to make us a lot of money because of where it is, you know. It's not in the middle of a stately home, in the middle of some lovely grounds, you know. It actually goes on to the high street. So, but it gets good reviews and it does the job. So just to finish, for a counselling intervention, I just wanted to pick this up because it's something that I've really noticed. For me, the corporate committee is the most important of all of the committees. And yet somehow for the last 2 years, we've cancelled a corporate committee. And so with no sufficient business. And that kind of is worrying. So I'm keen to ensure that this doesn't happen again next year. So I'd be keen to work with the chair and officers to look at some of the key areas around what's happening. I mean, we are a council in intervention. There should be reports that can come to this committee for this committee to be looking at. So I just want to, you know, work with the chair to make sure that that work plan really does represent, you know, what we want. I mean, with local government reorganisation, you know, there's going to be a lot that could come through this committee. I think it's exciting times. So, Chair, that is basically my report. Thank you for letting me have the time to take you through what I see as some of the priorities and some of the stuff, but there's much to do, Chair.
Thank you very much for that report, much appreciated. Councillor Howden has indicated he has a question. Are there any other members? Yep.
Councillor Matey. I have two, if that's okay, Chair. First of all, Councillor Worrell, I would say that it's noted how readily you engage with all members cross-party. It's very welcome, and you do that very diligently, so thank you. Firstly, on 1.23, you can't possibly suggest that the general election was delivered successfully. It was the only constituency in the country that was counted the next day. The Outer Hebrides, which you can only transverse through foot, car and boat, was counted faster than South Basel and East Thurrock. We can't possibly say that was a successful process. So surely there must be lessons that we're learning from it.
Absolutely, Councillor Horden. I was at the second recount, you know, and it was very, very close, and, you know, and it was fraught, and there was a lot of pressure put onto officers. So I think that there is some learning that officers took quite a lot of flack from that. So I think that there absolutely is lessons to be learned, but we do know, we generally run like pretty good elections here. But you're absolutely right that there should be lessons learned. But, you know, we are a small team. And I think that the team, the election team in general, done a very, very good job.
Yeah, I'm not in favour of officers getting flack, but there's no way that ballot papers from one constituency should end up in the counting boxes for another constituency. That should never, ever happen. There are multiple wards in Thurrock that are often decided by half a dozen votes. There are many constituencies across the country that were decided in double digits. I think 7, Councillor Mayney, in single digits. So ballot boxes should never be commingled. There shouldn't be ballot papers. If it simply is a fact of the matter that the result is close, everyone accepts that it's going to take some time to do bundle checks, to do a full hand recount. But ballots should not be found from one constituency in another. So we need to be quite clear there are things we've got to learn.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I'm not going to push back on that because it absolutely isn't acceptable.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And then on the issue of governance and democratic services, I think a lot of progress has been made. I think the scrutiny structure isn't perfect, but then again, I think the idea that there is a perfect scrutiny structure just isn't accurate. So I think it's about constantly refining. So I think that's good. But the issue of full council meetings, we discussed it briefly during the last full council session. I think you indicated at the time, and if I'm wrong, correct me, that you were not necessarily in favour of new full council meetings taking place now that the elections aren't being held. That you weren't necessarily in favour of new full councils being held before the next schedule of meetings for the next municipal year, now that we're not having elections in May. That leaves us in a situation where our last full council was February, not having full council this month, not having full council in April, and then May simply the mayor making. Then we get to June. That gives us a gap of about 117 days. Yeah, it's a third of a year without having full council. Now, I know the situation has changed because the elections have been cancelled, but surely you would agree, a third of a year without full council sessions, that's not acceptable, and we need to do something about that.
This is probably the only time in all of the years that I've been elected as a councillor that this has ever happened, you know, but we do have an open cabinet meeting tomorrow, so which we was asked to have it was either going to be a full council or a cabinet, you know, so every councillor is invited to that tomorrow, so I'll be interested to see how many of the 49 actually do make, you know, there was a big call for this, so I'd be interested to see tomorrow night how many of the 49 actually do agree and see that they should come here tomorrow night to have that conversation around local governance and devolution. And I didn't say I wasn't open to having that extra meeting because I think it came in after. What I did say is that I didn't see like the point in like we was looking at the overall structure of councils in the municipal year. I think that the question was about where I felt around council numbers in the municipal year, and that is currently being discussed with our leaders. So probably not something that for discussion here in an open forum tonight when that meeting is taking place between the leaders of the councils to look at the municipal year.
Did you want to come back?
Yeah, sorry, I appreciate the answer. Without over-labouring the point, open cabinet meetings are not the same as full council. I will be attending tomorrow night, but the fact of the matter is you've already got the report tabled in front of you on the night. Let's be perfectly frank about this. It doesn't matter what anyone says tomorrow night. You or Councillor Kent are not suddenly going to suspend the meeting and say this report needs to be redrafted and then hurry out with a bottle of Tipex. You know, tomorrow night is a fait accompli. Councillors are only being invited to ask a couple of questions. Most other councils, Castle Point, Tendring, Malden, Essex, right the way across the county, they have all had full councils so members could openly debate the issues before that report was produced. So let's not confuse having an open cabinet, which isn't unwelcome, to actually having a full and frank debate before the fact. Tomorrow night is very much after the fact.
I agree with you, but there is one item on everybody else's agenda, and whether they have a full council or a cabinet meeting is neither here nor there. The item, the paper going forward to every single council is dots, commas, crossing the I's and crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Is every single council is seeing those same papers go forward. They're not any different, you know, so, and there is absolutely, it doesn't matter, we can spend 2 hours debating that item tomorrow night, if that's what it is. We will not be like shutting the meeting down. Everybody will have the opportunity to stand up, have their 3 minutes, 4 minutes to talk, to ask questions about devolution tomorrow night. We are not closing down democracy on this. In fact, I think, for me, I think that yes, we do need to bring this to a meeting, but I think that further down the line, there's much better times for us to be having full council, open meetings about everything that is devolution and LGR. I think that the time is, you know, coming for us to have some amazing work done around this to make sure that we, as political leaders, get the best deal for Thurrock residents. I'm not about shutting, you know, I will never shut democracy down. I will never shy away from having the conversation. But let's have the right conversation at the right time and not just have a bum fight for the sake of having it. I just think, like, let's just get tomorrow night out of the way. This is about getting the submission in that's been agreed across the councils, and then get the real work done about making sure that we work across this chamber, which is why I started the working group, making sure that all parties have a voice in how devolution looks going forward.
I do appreciate that, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but again, the councils you just referenced, the reason they had full council before that document was confirmed was because the leaders of Basildon, Malden, Tendring, they couldn't have signed up to that document because if their full councils had chosen to bind them. We were never given that option. The document was produced without full council's input. Now, I appreciate there are certain things that the executive has to do out of expediency. This wasn't one of them. This concept hasn't suddenly snuck up upon us. So if we could just reflect on that going forward, and as you talk about the next stage of this process, I just hope that next stage, when we get to have that conversation as a full council, doesn't have to wait until June, because that's still 90 days away. There's absolutely no reason that further detailed conversations, further proper debates can't happen somewhere in the next 90 days. We do have the month of April, for example.
No, it Councillor.
But I know you can't. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Kerrin next, and then Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for your report, Councillor Wall. Overall, I thought it was a very positive report, and that came across in the way you presented it as well. You're clearly sort of excited about what's going on and what you're doing. I know you're very sort of frank and open when you're asked. So with all the positivity that's in there, could I just ask you to sort of lay out, are there any concerns that you have either from within the report or from any other aspect of your portfolio?
Great question, Councillor Karen. So my role really is, you know, transformation and change. So maybe it's about picking one up from both areas. So under transformation, we are a council in intervention, and we've got a lot of work to do still. And so for me, one of the areas, something that kind of has started to play on my mind a little bit, is how do we deal with the amount of change that we've got to deal with, as well as, and to get us back and I say that the intervention change and making sure that we shape the services, but now we've had on top of that now, we've got devolution and local government reform. So for me, it's about capacity, you know, and making sure that we've got the capacity to make sure that we keep on top of our services, because we might be a council in intervention, but we are still delivering some really phenomenal services, and our staff work really, really hard. So for me, one of the areas, it's about capacity of our officers and making sure that we've got the right people, making sure that we get the best for Thurrock as well as, you know, at the same time. And an area that also concerns me is we do need a culture change in this council. And it's been picked up in improvement reports into this council. And we need to, as 49 councillors, when we get elected, you get elected and you sign that register to say that you take on a duty. And so that takes you, you are not no longer just a resident that can write what they want and say what they want. And I think that I've seen far too often officers who have no right to reply, targeted, emailed, and it's not acceptable. And we as councillors, as leading councillors, need to step up and say that that is not acceptable in this chamber, because we are not coming out of intervention all the time. We cannot behave ourselves in here. We are doing some phenomenal work. We have saved an amazing amount of money. We have worked cross-party. We have got some really good work done. But there's always those that will just shout that and it's an embarrassment. You know, I don't want to sit here and listen to that and, you know, feel embarrassed about how the officers can't respond. So that, for me, is something that I really, really do want to see, that all councillors take on board their civic responsibility as a councillor, because it's not acceptable to just act the way they do in and out of a chamber. And so for us, as a party, I'd expect that if that was our councillors, that somebody from across the chamber would contact Councillor Karen, you as the whip, you know, or you know, and go to the leaders and just say enough's enough, and can, you know, I found it really embarrassing to be sitting opposite your councillor, and they did that, because it's time for us to call that out, because that improvement report needs to start to see some, because as leaders we get told by commissioners that it's not acceptable, it gets published, and our next report is just about to go. And when it comes back, I've got a funny feeling that it's going to say there's still a small cohort of councillors that can't behave themselves. And that's not good. That's not acceptable, because that takes off everything else that we're doing. So I'm quite happy to stand up and say it's not acceptable.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Wall. I agree with you about the culture aspect, and that's why I actually really enjoy sitting on this committee, because regardless of the party membership on here, it's always been a very constructive committee where everyone does does their due work and preparation and good chairmanship as well. You mentioned devolution and the regeneration, the reorganisation of local government, and for me, that's both the biggest concern, but also the biggest sort of source of excitement for this council. So very much a paradox, isn't it, at the moment with how we're viewing things. And if we get this right, then the opportunities are endless. If we don't get it right, then I don't even want to think about that. So you mentioned verbally when you were talking through your report about new measures around devolution, change and improvement for next municipal year. What things are on the horizon, and sort of what balance would your future reports perhaps have with all the continuing improvement work within Thurrock, but also all the work that's happening with devolution?
Certainly. So I'm sure that Patrick can probably add to this one, but there is a time that, so what will happen is we'll get to the end of the year and there was always going to be a report, so as well as a corporate report, there'll be a PMAF report about us highlighting what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, to make sure, so there's no good, we can't hide away from the journey that we're on, but it's nice for us to have a complete record about that. But I certainly will want to see how we're working cross-party on devolution, LGR, how we're engaging with our residents, how we're getting that message out there. So that is one of the key areas that I'm working on. But I think that for each portfolio holder, we are saying to them, speak to your officers and chairs of committee, scrutinies as well. If there's something that you think that we should be really measuring and somewhere we really should be like that's really slipping, and I think that needs to be kept in focus. So I think that we're only on our second. You have to remember, this is like quite a new way of reporting. So we're going to get stuff that we need to change. But stuff that maybe we're measuring that we shouldn't be measuring, and stuff that we're not measuring that we really should be measuring. So I still think it's like quite a fluid document. I don't know whether Patrick's got anything to add to that.
Thank you, Councillor Warren, and thank you, Councillor Kerrin, for your question. We have an opportunity when we refresh the corporate plan to think...
Sorry, Patrick, sorry.
Of course.
I can see where this is going. Can we sort of save those kind of questions for the report on the corporate plan? Because I'm just mindful it's more about your report than that. We're going to come on to all of this in a minute, I think, and you'll know from our discussions I've got a lot to say around devolution. But can we sort of save that debate for that item and just concentrate on sort of questions and things in the report for now? It's a valid question and one I want to probe myself, but I think it's probably better for the item later on in the evening, if that's okay. Have you got anything else you wanted to... So, Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. God, I had to do that on mic, didn't I? So, Councillor, you've mentioned as one of the key elements of the corporate plan, a development of a new service planning approach. As I understand it, the idea of that is to ensure that planning is focused on our corporate objectives, How's that going to work? So, what do we... okay, let me give an example. And for me, from what I've seen in my commercial life, if you like, that kind of approach is on a bit of a spectrum. At one end, you've got, let's make sure that the corporate objectives appear in each of your plans. At the other end of the spectrum is this plan actually going to contribute to our corporate objective? If not, why are we doing it? So which end of the spectrum are we aiming for?
What we're doing with our corporate plan should make sure that we're meeting our best value objectives. We will set clear objectives through the best value inspection. So it's about reshaping the council. But I'm also keen to make sure that we do not, and it's almost like LGR and Devo has taken over. What do we stop? Pause, restart, making sure that the work that we are doing is work that, I mean, we're still going to all be here. There's still going to be Tilbury, Grays, Chadwell, you know, we're still going to need to pick the bins up and do the potholes and all of that sort of stuff. But there will be some key areas that we do stop and have a pause and a restart and look at that again. So, but again, it will come out of the improvement reports. Everything, you know, we have to remember that we're being tracked very, very tightly. So I think that the work that we do will always be in line with our improvement journey as we come through intervention.
Thanks, Councillor. I'm pleased to hear that, because in my experience, one of the hardest things to do is to say to somebody who's been putting a lot of resource, a lot of effort, a lot of time into a project or a particular programme, we're going to have to put that to one side. We're going to have to stop it. It's very hard, but sometimes very necessary. And, you know, I'm looking for the reassurance that we are prepared to do it in order to remain very sharply focused on our corporate plan.
Patrick.
Thank you, Councillor. We know that the PMAF and reporting in this way is relatively new for the Council in this year. And we have an opportunity as we move into 25-26 to properly use service planning to help us align ourselves to new corporate priorities. Now, they will be around LGR and DEVO, but they will also be around delivering excellent public services through that process, because there is a balance of the two things. For the first time in a number of years, teams who have now received their budgets from finance colleagues are now using those budgets to set service plans, which will allow us to refresh the corporate plan. And so for the first time in a number of years, we are going through an appropriate and timely process to make sure there is a golden thread through all of our work. And we hope to be able to show that to you in the reporting for the next financial year.
Thank you. Sorry, is it Patrick? My glasses seem to not work that well. Yeah, thanks for that. So I suppose where I'm coming to with that is that if this, you know, if the service plan is meant to fit the objectives of the corporate plan and the requirements of DEVO, LGR, can we expect to see any changes to the structure of the leadership if you, for instance, discover that actually we need to organise things in a different way?
So the structure that the Managing Director, Commissioner and Chief Executive put in place allows for flexibility at the centre. So the Chief Executive's office, led by the Assistant Chief Executive, allows for flexibility for exactly these reasons. Things come down the track that mean the Council needs to refocus its resources. And what we are doing at the centre, what the Assistant Chief Executive is leading, is a reshaping of that team to provide the capacity that Councillor Worrell referred to in her previous answer for various projects, whether it be digital or transformation or indeed local government reorganisation and devolution. We, of course, can share those plans as they come to fruition with this committee. We are in a period until this submission goes in. We are in a period where there is work to do, but that will ramp up over the summer towards the next September deadline, and we will expect to change and shape our teams to meet those deadlines.
Thank you, both of you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members or comments? No? Okay, just a few things from me. Going back to the issue of member conduct, I agree with what you said and what other members said. I think certainly at full council meetings, some of what we see is just an example of buffoonery, quite frankly. The problem is, you know, it's easy. It's okay for commissioners to sort of put pressure on other politicians to call it out, but you kind of get the impression that's what those calls in the disruption actually want you to do. My question is, what as a council can we actually do to tackle that? It's not just an issue for the political parties to call out. That doesn't solve the problem. It's very often what people want to happen because they want to say the other parties are joining together to silence us, kind of thing. So what can we actually do as a council to tackle that? And a second question is, to what extent do you think some of the disruptive behaviour we see is as a result of frustration with officers, because it's a two-way street. Officer-member relations are a two-way street. I'm not excusing at all some of the behaviour we've seen, but do you think that officers could perhaps do their part as well? I've seen some of the emails you're talking about, but I've also seen some of the emails from officers back, and frankly, they leave a lot to be desired. There's a lot of flippantry and sarcasm in some of the emails I've seen from officers. So it's a two-way street. So yes, we can call out member behaviour, but do you think officers could do their bit as well, perhaps to improve officer-member relationships?
Thanks, Councillor Maney. And I don't really want to sort of target anybody and say, you know, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But if there is a time when there is any concern about any officer, then I would suggest that in the same way that you would report a councillor for behaviour, that door is also open for you to, you know, go and say that this isn't acceptable as officers. You know, so I don't really want to go anywhere near that, but hopefully the government is looking at reform. And hopefully that reform is going to have a little bit more teeth to it. Because I think that what happens is we know that those councillors and know that there's very little we can do. And that's why I call on the 49 of us to say it's not acceptable, because we know that there is very, very little, but there is stuff going on behind the scenes. It's gone on a little bit too long. But I would say that if there is a time when anybody receives an email from an officer that they feel is not acceptable, then there is obviously a route for you to be able to do that. But this is about, you know, us again, you know, owning our problems, you know, in a transparent way. So it's about, you know, being out there, and only by doing this and owning our problems will we see any real improvement.
Thank you. And on the issue of the corporate plan, it's always been a slight concern of mine that we are a council intervention, and I've said it at other corporate ONS meetings, that we're not just a failing council in terms of our finance. Let's be honest. You know, Thurrock has been a failing council more or less since the point it was conceived as a unitary authority, because it's too small, and as a councillor of 23 years standing, we've never done many things great. We can always point to services that are good. Adult social care, superb. But let's be honest, we've been a failing council for a lot of years, and we've not delivered the best services for our residents when you compare us to other councils. And when I, you know, look at the measurements under the corporate plan, it does stagger me that they paint a very rosy picture. They don't reflect what I would expect to say. I'd expect it to reflect the fact that we're not doing very well in some areas, and then us work towards the picture we see now. And I've always been a bit concerned that the corporate plan is overall just weak. It doesn't really test us. It's perhaps some of the things that we measure and the metrics are, they're more comfortable rather than stretching. When you see, you know, the third set of reporting, and again, I think that 4% of the corporate plan milestones are red. That was what I'd expect to see in a council that's an example of good local governance. So do you think, you did touch on it, but do you think really that if we're going to continue to have confidence in the corporate plan, that we really need to sort of tighten up some of the targets and some of the way that we measure them?
Thanks, Councillor Maney. So it took me a little bit of time to realise that you're actually talking about PMAF, aren't you, and the framework of our measurements. Okay, so you know, this is, you have to remember that what we had before was the corporate scorecard. That was pretty dire, actually. It was old-fashioned. This is a new way of measuring. This is quite a modern way. I quite like the way that it's laid out. There's lots of graphs where you can, you know, it's quite easy to read. But it's new. So if there's an area, and I say this quite honestly, if there's areas that you feel that should be measured, then we are not saying don't measure them. You know, this is only the second one, you know. So I think as we go on, this was always never about, you know, these are the ones that we'll only ever measure. This was always about the first year and us refreshing the measurements as we go on, and things will drop off and things will happen, you know, but I think that it is a good idea. You know, I think that it's good, and I think that it's honest. And as we go in, I think that we'll be able to track, you know, stuff that goes into red, stuff that's in amber should come into green, you know. So I think that, and there will be, Cabinet will now be meeting, and it will be built into the municipal year. There will be a meeting of Cabinet that solely looks at PMAF and the targets and meets with their officers, because we've got to make sure that we are measuring right and that we're stretching ourselves right. You know, we don't want to be coasting, but at the same time, when we are measuring, we don't want to be overstretching. So I think that at the moment, this is new. And next year, hopefully, you know, we'll have a much better idea and see some new stuff. But perhaps we've got to get through this year before we start adding stuff in, you know, because you can't just like suddenly start putting stuff in halfway through a year.
Sorry, perhaps I'll clarify the question. I don't think we need to add more stuff in. What I'm seeing is a sea of green. I think perhaps from the get-go, our targets have been set too low. They're not stretching enough. As I said, if you debranded this and you showed it to someone and said, what do you think that tells you about the council it's come from? They'd say, it's a wonderful council, it's doing everything right. It's an example of how a council should be run. And then you say, well, that's Thurrock Council, and you think, hang on a minute, that you know, this reflection doesn't fit with what we know about the council. You know, you would expect to see a lot more red, a lot more amber, and then we work towards building that council that we're all aiming for. It just seems too good to be true when we know the position the council's in. And I just feel this isn't an honest reflection. I know it's early days, but time isn't really on our side. It doesn't seem an honest reflection of where I think we are as a council overall.
Hand over to Patrick, because they worked really hard on the metrics.
Again, I know you're tight for time. We'll pick up on that, if that's okay, because we're going to go, a lot of these questions we're going to just regurgitate, I think, when we come to the corporate performance report. So, you know, if that's okay, you know. No more questions, really. Just a couple of comments, really, that I think just to place on record. The issue of, I completely endorse what Councillor Howden said. There is a feeling, I think, that we keep talking about transparency, but some members, I think, are beginning to feel there is this creeping lack of transparency. We now know that we're looking at there's a proposal to hold less full councils in the new municipal year. We know conversations are ongoing and no decision has been made, but there is no meeting of this council that's more important than full council. It might not make the decisions that it used to make historically, but it's the one meeting of the council where all 49 members come together. And the one thing that we have is a vote. And that's, you said, when we become councillors, we assume a special duty. We do. We go from being residents to councillors. Well, one of those duties, one of those things that we exercise is our right to make decisions on behalf of the residents we represent and exercise a vote, exercise our judgment. And you mentioned the Cabinet meeting tomorrow night, which I'll be attending. The one thing 49 members won't have is a vote. We can turn up and we can speak, but anyone can do that. I can go to the pub and have a chinwag with my mates about what I think about devolution. When I come here, I expect all members to be able to have some influence over the decision making. And I don't want to put you on the spot, and I don't want you to comment on it, because it's aimed not just at you, it's aimed at the administration and officers. We do need to resist this creeping curtailment of meetings and members' right to have a vote at meetings and to shape the decision. Whether we've got the numbers to do that or not, just being able to exercise a vote and have that vote as a matter of public record is much more than just being able to turn up and talk at Cabinet before it makes its decision. So I just ask that you hold that in mind and the administration holds that in mind. It's not okay to hold less and less meetings where members can physically turn up and vote by saying it doesn't matter because we're having more talking shops where people can ask questions. That's not the same. And if we want to improve officer-member relationships and we want to address some of that frustration from members, the way to do it is not really to hold less meetings, but try and fob people off by saying, don't worry, you're having something you can go and talk at. So it's I don't, if you want to say something on that, feel free, but I'm not putting you on the spot because it doesn't solely rest with you. But I do think, you know, as the chair of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I do have to make that point. Now, I do think that not having a full council between now and June, and then possibly considering holding less full councils in the new municipal year, when we know the journey we're about to go on, and where we are, where council of intervention is, well, I think it's reprehensible, to be honest. And I think that, you know, if you want to engage members more, you don't do that by having less meetings where they can turn up and vote.
Do you mind if I come back? And I'm not going to talk about the planning of the municipal year because that is currently sitting with the leaders of this council. So, and it's not for scrutiny to make that decision or for us to influence that in any other way. But what I want to say is I still believe that Cabinet is the decision-making meeting of this council. And again, and we should move more of the questions. Councillors have every right to come and ask a question on any report that goes to Cabinet. And it is historic. And I'm not saying that it's now, it's historic. I mean, I've been a councillor since 2008 and, you know, we've never really got under the skin of Cabinet being the place where decisions are made at this council. And we've talked about it earlier, you know, like full council, it's a bit of a show sometimes, you know, it's a bit where people play out, you know, to an audience. So I think that we do need to really push and look at the role of this council going forward. I'm not going to talk about the numbers of the meetings because, as I say, that's being looked at. But, you know, if you do have a question, you know, there is a process for people, any of the 49 councillors, residents can come to Cabinet and ask questions. So, you know, it's not about arguing which is the most important place. Actually, the best piece of work that's been done, you know, some of the best questions, when you look at the chamber and the public gallery at full council, unless there is a petition being presented to this council, you can look up there and there will be maybe one or two. You look at the people viewing the full council. But we've had 2 public question times, and I would say that we've answered more questions there than we've probably had from residents in 10 years, just from 2. And these will be planned. So that is where they are the people that we are there to represent. So I don't see public question. I see that as important, not a replacement. I'm quite happy, you know, we can have, I spoke when you asked me the question in council about having a themed meeting, and I absolutely believe that we should be having those themed meetings in this council. It's about change and not resisting change and going with, you know, what is right. So, and there's a debate to be had about that, and I'm sure that we'll have many, many more, Councillor Maney, about what does a modern council look like and what does the meetings of a modern council look like.
Thank you. Can I move a motion at Cabinet? Exactly. You're falling into this trap again, I think, of saying that if you have events where I don't want to ask questions, we're falling into this trap. You're falling into this trap as a council of saying that if we have more events where councillors can go and ask questions, that's all right. I think what we're at risk of doing is thinking that that's okay to have events where you ask questions. It's not the same. Full council members can move. We've had some very good motions which have influenced policy. They haven't come about by having questions. The task force that's currently looking at school parking, that came about as a motion. We had a motion around, it didn't excite me at the time, but it did lead to something good. We had a motion around tree planting that actually had tangible outcomes. They didn't come about for asking questions. They were debates that members could get excited about. They had tangible outcomes. You don't get those tangible outcomes through having events where you turn up and ask questions. And I would push back on this idea that you measure the value of full council on how many people are sitting in the public gallery, because there's no one sitting in the public gallery at cabinet meetings either. And what there are more people are doing is watching online, because when I open my email the next day, I'll have very often, when there's been a debate that people are interested in, I'll have emails from residents who say they watched it online. So on the one hand, we like to push this idea that we're making it easier for people to watch online, and then we're saying, oh, well, there's no one sitting in the public gallery, so no one's watching. I don't want to put this on you on the spot about this, but I do need to push back as well on the issue that it's not for corporate ONS to make decisions around full council. I don't think any of us are trying to do that. We're not trying to make decisions on the municipal calendar, but it's absolutely our role to push back and challenge where we think a watering down of transparency under the pretense that it's somehow modernisation. We only have to look round at our nearest neighbours and see they aren't doing this. In fact, there's been an example where, on the issue of devolution, other local authorities actually held extraordinary meetings of the entire council. So there is definitely a whiff of a rolling back of transparency at this council. If we really think the idea is to have less meetings of full council and more events where you can ask questions. None of us, I think, when we stood for election, thought, I'm going to become a councillor so I can ask questions. It's so that we can influence, change, bring forward ideas, debate. I didn't become a councillor. I haven't been a councillor for 20 years, so I can go to events and ask questions. So, again, I don't want to, that's just something I have to say, to put on record how I feel. But it's, I'm not necessarily pushing you on that. But Councillor Howden, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just to reinforce what you were saying, we can't get into the business of saying residents don't turn up to watch full councils. Based on that mentality, I think twice the amount of people voted in my last election than voted in Councillor Fletcher's election. That doesn't mean that I should have twice the say. Democracy happens incidentally. It's not a show of hands outside of an election period. Quite clearly, there's been a conversation in the administration between cabinet and officers regarding what you do about the minority of council outbursts from certain members that paints all in a bad light. I think we're spending too much time focusing on this culture stuff. Look at Westminster, look at Aberystwyth Council, look at Edinburgh Council, look at the American Congress, look at the French Chamber of Deputies. Every single legislative body anywhere in the world is always going to have representatives who are boorish, some who are lazy, who sit in the chamber and they never say a thing. Unfortunately, we can't fix that. I know sometimes commissioners look at us, and I'm sure you're under pressure yourself, and look at you and say, you've got to do something about this culture. Well, unfortunately, we work with our colleagues who get sent here by the electorate. They're not our employees. We cannot control them as much as I would like to, as much as I spent 15 years trying to control some of my colleagues. You can't do it. But there are practical things we can do. There are practical things you can do. You know that. You have a majority. I would personally point to that. Since you have video recordings in the chamber, I think a lot more grandstanding has happened since we had video recordings and simply audio recordings. When everything was audio recorded, the press and the public could listen to what was said by each member, and there was absolute transparency. When we started to have video recordings, that, in my view, is when you started to get certain members grandstanding. And I think that's actually a problem that's been commented in lots of legislative bodies that have said that the quality of debate descended when you had this mix of social media and video recording come together. So I think there are practical considerations that we can make, but I just don't think we can get in the business of policing the behaviours of the people who the electorate sent here. It's just not within our gift. And I know you're under pressure to try and fix it, but I think we need to look at the practical solutions rather than, if you can't change the people, change the people. And that's not something we have the ability to do.
Councillor Abbas.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly on portfolios, obviously these comments, so what I perceived from this, not just from portfolios, but it looks like this is a cabinet decision where they believe elected members shouldn't meet or shouldn't make a decision, or this is just a show of, numbers. So this is not actually show of numbers. So I meet, if not hundreds, certainly dozens of people locally, So the cabinet member have said she has been asked more questions outside the chamber than here. So dozens of people ask me questions almost weekly and I answer them. So does this mean I don't need to come to any council meetings because I'm doing job or answering questions or hundreds of questions? So this is not about cabinet or certain individuals. So this is giving this power back to, as she has rightly said in the start, when we sign these papers, so we take this responsibility to go above and beyond being a resident. So you are taking this decision away. So you are saying something, but you don't believe in democratic values, giving these powers or a chance to elected members to vote or influence those decisions. So the cabinet member, whatever questions we will be asking or other members will be asking, so they will have no say literally because the decisions has already been potentially made what you are going to make those decisions. So I literally have my reservations on this.
Thank you, Councillor Abbas. Again, I agree. And I think one of the things, I don't want this to get into a debate here, but one of the things about asking questions, I mean, at full council, I can ask, providing it fits within the remit of the Constitution, I can ask a question on anything I want, anything that's of interest to my residents. At Cabinet, I can only ask questions on things that are on the agenda. So if somebody comes to me and wants me to ask a question about Blackshots Flats, for example, or the Lower Thames Crossing, and there's nothing on the agenda relevant to that at Cabinet, you can't. So it is a watering down of democracy, but I'm really, really keen that we don't turn this into a debate on this here tonight because it's not a specific item on the agenda, but, as a committee, we are right to place our views on record, even if it's not shared by all members. I think, we're within our rights to do that. But we need to move on pretty soon, but I will take one question from Councillor Fletcher, then we'll move on.
To be honest, Chair, it's actually agreeing with you. There's a lot of really interesting debate coming out here about the role of full council, the role of cabinet, which, very clearly says there should be a debate. Whether here tonight is the place for that debate. Trouble is, we will be running through our guillotine if we gave it anywhere near the time that it deserves. So may I suggest that that's one we should find the right place and time for and park it there.
I think you're right, but it comes back to what we said. We haven't got a full council till June. So when you cancel meetings or refuse to hold them, the temptation is to try and have these debates at the meetings that do take place because we have no outlet anywhere else to have them. As for the guillotine, we had a debate around that. I mean, if we do reach 9 o'clock or 9:30, there's two things we can do. We can just ignore it, which I'd be minded to do. We can do anything about it if we carry on. But secondly, we'll have to abide by the rules and we won't take the items that are on here. But that, again, goes back to what I said about creeping lack of transparency. All of these things feed into that. But I'm going to move on now because I think we've strayed well from the point. It's not what Councillor Worrell came here for. All the comments that we've had are entirely valid, and we're saying them here because we have no other venue to say them at. But I'm going to move on because it's not fair on Councillor Worrell and it's not something that's on the agenda. So unless there's any further final questions to Councillor Worrell, can I thank her for coming and giving a really interesting presentation or report to the corporate owners. It's really appreciated, and I hope you've taken on board our comments. If nothing else, it's prompted a bit of debate, which I think is really helpful. So thank you very much for coming.
Chair, and thank you for inviting me. It was nice to be able to come and share, the year with you.
Thank you. So we'll go back to the agenda, and there are 3 briefing notes at item 4, 5 and 6, which I think we're going to take them together, but actually I want to take them individually if we can. Who's presenting those items. Is it you, Lucy, or Claire? You're just going to run through them very quickly, I think, weren't you?
Yes, thank you,
you.
Chair.
Just if we take item 4, first of all, is a briefing note on Thurrock recycling rates. So can we take that one first?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. So the briefing notes have been included within the agenda to provide feedback from previous committee discussions regarding the target for the recycling rate, which was considered by the Place ONS committee, I believe, last month. So that just provides that discussion points from that, and I think actually that may also lead into our further discussion regarding the monitoring of the PMAF as well, as that was an action from that.
Thank you. Again, there's no formal recommendation, it's just to note, but this does raise a few questions for me. So, just, did you want to say something? No. Sorry, is somebody? No, right. So, just so I'm clear, this. Did you want to come in, Councillor Abbas?
Just a quick one. Obviously keeping in mind this devolution and restructuring, so how will you achieve this 50% recycling rate by 2031?
So, right, I will take that question, but there's a point I wanted to make before that. So just to sort of give this some context, I think this briefing note is here because we strayed into the issue of recycling and recycling rates and whether it was a stretching target a bit too much, and I instigated it at the last meeting. But it wasn't so much because I wanted to engineer a debate about recycling, what I felt about it, although I did. It was because I felt it basically shone a light on part of the corporate plan. So you've now brought this briefing paper which tells us that 30% recycling target is actually not the target. There's a 50% recycling target in the waste strategy. Is that right?
Tony Fletcher, would you be able to?
Yeah, it sets out the 50% targets by 2031.
So what is the target then? Is the corporate plan target now not the target because there's a waste strategy target? And if there is a waste strategy target, why have we got a different target in the corporate plan? Are there targets all over the council that don't align with the corporate plan? What one are we aiming for?
So, just helpful to come in there, Chair. I think what we're trying to describe here and trying to clarify in the note is that the life of any strategy, so the waste strategy goes over a number of years, and that demonstrates that over the number of years of the strategy, there'll be there's a target by the end of the strategy, which in this case is 2030 or 2031. What we try to do in the reporting that you see at Appendix 1 is demonstrate how that steps up over each year. So over the life of the strategy, you get to one point, but in each year, on this particular metric, you have a step in each year that gets you to that target in those number of years. And I think what we're trying to more clearly establish in the briefing note is that we're demonstrating progress against the yearly target that gets you to at the end of the strategy the rate you want to be at for the life of the strategy. So we're seeing the interaction between yearly action and long-term strategy.
I must be wrong then, because I thought the target, if you like, in the corporate plan was for us as a council to be recycling 30% of our waste. Unless I've read it wrong, and correct me if I am wrong, there was no stepping up. The target isn't to step up, it was to hit that target, that 30% target, and it's green because we've hit it, so everything's hunky-dory. There was no stepping up to get to that 50%. It seems to me we've got two conflicting targets, and we're now trying to find an argument that says, oh no, actually they tie together.
They've always been tied together. What we haven't done clearly enough in the reporting for this year is demonstrate that the step in each year is on a journey towards 50. We have not clearly demonstrated enough that each year builds on the last and gets us to 50%.
On that point, then, I think we can agree, because my reading of that target was that it doesn't mention the stepping up, so that hasn't been clearly explained, but okay.
Sorry,
Go on, Dave.
yeah, the note is here to clarify that point. If it doesn't achieve that, we can look at that again, and we can most certainly look for the next reporting year to be much clearer in terms of where we are looking at step-up targets across a number of years.
Okay. Just one very final question. When things like this are exposed, for example, when we as a committee, this has only come about because of our probing and questioning at the last meeting, what assurances can we have as a committee that when we expose something like this, we don't get presented reports that say, no, we don't get a briefing report which seems to explain away the discrepancy by saying, oh no, there's a stepping up kind of exit. It's not in the target, it's not explained in the report you saw, but that's actually what's happening. What confidence it doesn't become like an off-the-peg excuse, if you like, to explain discrepancies?
I think we have to be clear that this amount of reporting, at this rate of reporting, and this level of robust questioning, which is completely appropriate from overview and scrutiny, is new in this council, because for too long there was a number of years where this wasn't the case. Now, this kind of questioning and probing is exactly where we should be, and we are working as officers to ensure that across services we have a standardised approach to both reporting, how we talk about it, and how we respond to it. We are working with officers across the organisation, an insights board that I chair, that looks at this data in the same way that you do and tries to question and probe it from a peer-to-peer service perspective. And so we think about what the data tells us. In terms of the confidence and trust that officers can give you in conversations like this, I think I would say, Councillor, that I'd be keen to hear from members of the committee, and indeed from you, that if you felt you were hearing the same explanations each time, and that we were in fact explaining things away in the same way, off the peg, to use your language, I would hope that, and I know from members of this committee, you'd be comfortable to challenge me on that. And I hope also that as we go through this process, you will see the same officers come to this committee on a regular basis to talk to you about the metrics in their service. I would expect them to each time come with fresh mind, not come with excuses, not come with off-the-peg answers, and be ready to take appropriate and robust questioning.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, I think you can rest assured we won't shy away from asking difficult questions. And it isn't an attempt to catch out people or, sort of try and highlight badges. I think this is evidence of this committee doing its job. We're exercising our role, which is why this briefing report is here, because we've asked a question that needs an answer and we've got it. We'll make of it what we will. I do take on board your comments, but we do need to sort of be on our guard and make sure that when we do sort of get confronted with conflicting targets, we don't have this reoccurring excuse that there's a stepping up, but it isn't explained in the corporate plan. But thanks for that. Any other specific questions, Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you, Chair. Not so much a question, perhaps, just building on your point. I think there are two aspects to this. One, when is a briefing note not a briefing note? And two, what makes a good plan? So if I can just do the two separately. I think when we talk about off-the-peg answers, what we may be talking about is a lot of the plans and a lot of the briefing notes and a lot of the documents that we get talk about the process. They don't talk about the outcomes. So too often what we're getting is, well, you went and spoke to this group and this group said that was okay, so therefore it's okay. No, that wasn't what we asked. What we asked was why. And what we're looking for is, well, why? Because. And if it's not actually right, if yes, you have a point, here's what we're going to do about it. A briefing note for me about that particular, the recycling rate, would explain I guess it's in here, but it's not front and centre, would say, yep, you're right, 30 years not actually good enough because we've in fact set ourselves. So, yeah, if you're looking for, you know, a succinct challenge, and you're not getting it yet, let's make our briefing notes more about the outcomes than about the process, because we know the process, we were part of it. So that's point one. Point two about the plans, I think there are two aspects of this. One is coordination, and the other is dynamic planning. It's the boring aspect of planning, and I know it because I've been involved in both plans and in writing annual reports, to just make sure that that plan there matches that plan there, because it's boring, it's not part of the fun stuff, but it's essential. Because if there's a plan somewhere that says recycling is on that, the corporate plan should reflect that. And it's a simple graph in that particular case. It should not give the impression that the corporate plan was written at one point, and then the other plan was written later, and nobody actually linked back. So the coordination is absolutely vital. And secondly, a dynamic plan is always going to be more useful than a point-in-time plan. You know, we asked the question, 30%, are we really happy with that? Well, no, you're not. You've told us you're not. But your plan, because it's here we are now, doesn't suggest that. A lot more, if you're doing any dynamic planning, tell us about it. You know, and you know, when we go on to the corporate performance, I'm as interested in what you're doing about the things that aren't great as in the things that are great. And that for me is the dynamic planning. Where are we? Where do we want to get to? How do we get there? Simple as that. So if the plan has that in it, I'll probably talk less.
Superbly put. So next item is the briefing note on the final revenue budget 2025-26 and final medium-term financial strategy 2025 to 26.
I'll take that one, Councillor. The briefing notes for items 5 and 6 provide an overview of the Cabinet discussions and decisions following the pre-decision scrutiny for the fees and charges policy and the draft general budget and MTFS that was brought to this committee. So it's just to close that loop, really.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? No, thank you. I think I've gone a bit out of sync, haven't I? But there's the final briefing note is on the fees and charges policy and schedule.
And that's exactly the same as the previous one, that it all relates to pre-decision scrutiny and provides that journey from scrutiny to Cabinet and then the discussions that were had and Cabinet's recommendations.
Thank you. Is there an officer here who could comment on this in a little bit more detail if we wanted to ask a question? Try? Okay. I will just say, I know they're briefing notes, so they're to know, but nothing that comes to this committee will ever be just to know. I hate to know reports. If they're on the agenda and there's questions or debate around them, we'll take care. We'll never just note a report. So when these briefing notes come here, we should just be mindful that it might engineer some sort of questions or some debate. Are there any questions, or Councillor Abbas?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You know, just on fee and charges, I was assured by the portfolio holder and officers they will look into these increases on burial costs because there are some marginalized communities, Muslims and Nepalese Gurkha communities. So I raised concerns even in the meeting, and I was assured they will look into this. But now it's very kind of a static response, very bureaucratic, like this has been done in line with inflation. But I'm just slightly concerned if I was given assurance, so that should have been considered. So I was under impression they will look into this.
Thank you, Councillor. Can somebody respond to that?
So apologies, you should have received a response on that because there was a lot of benchmarking done on the burial fees and a response should have been sent by the service because that was written. So if it hasn't been sent, I will get that sent out as soon as possible.
I think it was in the report, I think it was in the last meeting, and we did have this discussion on this one, you know. I asked them to reconsider, you know, considering these marginalized communities, you know, the financial kind of capabilities, how they pay, and we had these discussions, and I was assured by the cabinet, portfolio holder and officers, they will reconsider this, you know. So obviously benchmarking and all those things were discussed in that report.
Okay, I'll take that away and discuss with Councillor Muldowney again and get a response back.
Thank you. Just a quick comment or question from me. It's in relation to the proposal that Cabinet agreed, which was to charge fees for events on council-held land. Obviously, after the last committee, where we considered the fees and charges, a number of, me included, a number of members of this committee felt strong enough about that proposal to make a written recommendation to Cabinet. It didn't uphold that recommendation, but that, you know, as is, it's right. But I think there was some sort of jiggery-pokery with the wording of the proposal to try and make after our meeting and prior to the Cabinet meeting, to try and make it look like it would only catch community events where there was an element of profit being generated. But my concern is around what people's interpretation of profit actually is, because I've heard from one community organisation that has cancelled community events because of this new fee. Are we saying that if a community forum or community organisation arranges a community event like a fete, for example, and the local church has a stall selling bric-a-brac and makes £100, because there's that element of money changing hands, that this would then invoke a quite substantial charge to those people organising that event?
So I remember the conversation, and I don't believe that we were discussing profit as in terms of profit, because we were talking about all charitable events and organisations having a discount on that. So, but I will clarify the full extent of the conversation and get a response.
So let's give an example. Let's pick a ward. I don't know, Ockenden. Ockenden every year has an event where they turn on the Christmas lights. Some years, the Christmas before last, they held a very small event where, in order to engineer some community spirit, they had a few stalls selling, you know, craft, and Brenna had some children's fairs there that were not making profit, but they were there just to cater for a very small number of people. My interpretation of that is that that event would now, the people who've organised that event year in, year out in Ockenden would now have to pay the discount. There might be a discount, but still several £100 those people, that the organisers of that event would have to pay in order to run that event. That's a real community event in Ockenden that lots of people go to. And it seems to me now that the forum that organised that, if they wanted to have the local church there selling, you know, homemade cakes, for example, they wanted the showmen, who are very much part of the community, volunteered to provide a few small rides for children out of the kindness of their heart, but they charge a small amount. They're not making any money out of it, because their money is changing hands. They now have to pay hundreds of pounds. Is that right, that because money's being handed over, this new fee now comes into play?
So, no. So what we've done is that any community groups or forums hosting non-fee earning events, they don't charge a fee on that. So that is to foster community engagement and support for local initiatives. So the fee does not apply to those organisations.
So, again, sorry to put you on the spot, but the wording of the policy was very clear that if there is an event and somebody organises an event and there are participants of that event that are offering a service or a good in exchange for money, then they'll have to pay a fee. I think if what you're saying is right, it turns this policy on its head. Are you saying that if there's a community fete and there are people at the fete charging money for goods, even though the spirit of that event is very much community orientated, this doesn't apply?
Only those that are non-fee earning, that it would be free. The ones that are generating income, they would have to pay towards it, but with the reduction.
So that scenario I just gave, where the local church has got a stall, it's selling homemade cakes for a few quid, and the showman running 2 or 3 small rides for children in exchange for money, they would have to pay this fee.
Yes, but at the reduced rate.
That's not much comfort to the
No.
community forum. That's just hand over several £100s. Don't think it's fair to press you on this, because I think it was a political decision and no consideration has been given to the consequence of that to community events. And if you go back to the example I just gave, Ockenden, that very cherished event probably won't take place anymore, because the organisers of it couldn't possibly, pay hundreds of pounds. I don't expect you to respond to that, because I know it was a political decision. It wasn't one you made. I just think that it's very ill thought out. Yeah, sure. We're moving on in a minute, but yes.
Yeah, thank you. So a little bit of context with this. So this is one of the savings that were put forward for 25-26. And the original intention behind it was really to generate income from commercial events, whether that's from a commercial company doing the event or big charities. This has been taken off the fees and charges for next year. And Dawn and Claire's recommended the Task and Finish group put on this, because the service didn't get it right in terms of the charging, in terms of ensuring that communities weren't impacted by it. They just did not get it right with the fee structure that they put in. So they're going back, and it's been recommended to Task and Finish group.
Thank you for that. I agree you didn't get it right, which is why we desperately tried until the last minute to get that even if not overturned, but I think one of the recommendations was quite simply you just didn't implement it until we as a committee had enough time to look at it, but even that wasn't heeded. But so next year we're going to review it, but for the remainder of this year, it's been passed by Cabinet, this fee applies, doesn't it? It's been agreed by Cabinet, so it applies.
I'd need to confirm with Dawn, but I got the impression from the last email and conversation I had with Dawn that it was being pulled from fees and charges, so it won't be going live from the 1st of April.
I don't want to bear in mind what you said about officer member relations. The very last thing I want to do is sort of get out my pram a little bit, but can you see the frustration when we as a committee, we go through a process, and we've had the BVI, which has talked about the need for transparency and very clear decision making, and that policy can't be made on the hoof, and we've now got this example before us of fees and charges is an annual event. It goes through a very clear process, and we're being told it's been approved, it was changed at Cabinet, and now we're being told something that was agreed has been pulled, but there's no public record of it. Have we learned anything? Have we really learned anything when something as fundamental as fees and charges, something that the BVI said we had to focus on as part of our recovery, we have an example here of, and it's only one fee, one charge out of many, but again, it opens up all these questions about process when it's gone through scrutiny, it's gone through Cabinet, it's been agreed, it's been changed on the night from what was originally published, and now we hear through debate on something that's supposed to be a briefing note, it's not even supposed to engineer a debate, that, oh, actually, it may have been pulled. Does this happen at any other council? It's just not acceptable. We keep finding these things out because we're pushing debate that this clear process we should be following just isn't. It's lots of hands. Councillor Fletcher, did you indicate Councillor Abbas? You were first. Councillor Abbas, Councillor Fletcher, then Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officer. It's nothing personal against you. I think, the message we are sending to these small community groups and our local residents is like, when as a council we have to do something, we are planning like 10 years, 20 years, when we know we wouldn't be here in next year or year after. So, like I gave example earlier at item 4, because we are setting a target by 2030 when we clearly know after devolution and restructuring, we wouldn't be here. So when it comes to doing something from our end, we are setting a target of 10, 15, 20 years, which we know is not achievable. But here, when even these are small things, we should encourage our residents and small groups and organizations to do more activities, to involve wider community groups. So here we are making these very ambiguous wordings and these statements, where even our officers had no clarity what these statements are. So how on earth we will expect a small group, because we know how in my ward, for example, Purfleet, they do a lot of activities, in West Thurrock, they do a lot of activities, so they always struggle. So sometimes they have these small stalls. So I think this wording is like we are just kind of sending those very ambiguous messages, scaring them off, not holding. We have to keep in mind all those small organizations, local residents groups, those are people who volunteer their own time. So I think rather than, we need to have kind of more simple, straightforward process, not penalizing them for organizing community events.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with everything you say. What I don't want us to do is to start having, because again, this is not an item that would ordinarily come, I think, to this committee. I asked the question because I was genuinely confused as to what it meant, because there'd been a bit of chopping and changing and interpreting, and I was trying to get clear in my mind what the policy actually was. That then shone a light on which is what is within our remit, the issue of process. So what we can't do as a committee is now have a big debate around this specific fee and what it means for charitable organisations. Our job is to look more holistically, I think, and for me, the glaring problem I now have is that we again have this muddled approach to decision making and making policy, which we've now just found out may not apply because a decision has been made somewhere behind closed doors to disapply it when that very clear annual process has been gone through. So I know there's a lot of hands up and I will take them. I am going to ask members, let's not get into a debate about this specific item and what it means for the community. And I know what it means and I completely agree with Councillor Abbas, but it's not a debate we should now descend into. It's more about the whole process that I'm really concerned about. So I will ask members if they not get too bogged down in this actual specific item. If there's questions on the process as such, then by all means. So Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I do think it's important to basically a point of interpretation, a point of fact. You've made a number of points from the Chair, so I just wish to speak to a couple of them. One, point of interpretation. If this was a poor piece of decision-making when it first came out, which I think we all agree it was, I want to see it changed. I want to see it looked at. If the process of it being looked at is a bit messy, okay, we learn from that. But the fact that a decision was made following our intervention that, yeah, actually the way the original approach was wrong, then I think we're doing something right, not doing something wrong, by actually looking at it, you guys, looking at it, changing it. If it takes a work group, fine. As long as we end up with something that is clearer and that is fairer. So if the process is a bit wobbly, well, do you know what? Processes start wobbly. And then you end up with the right answer, and the next time you know what the process is. Second point, Chair, a point of fact. We talked about, you mentioned political decisions. That was a political decision. 3 members of the Conservative previous cabinet stood up, and you know what I'm talking about, the Black Shots debate, stood up and told us that a decision made in cabinet could very easily be overturned. It just takes
Sorry,
a political
I'm going to
decision.
interject there because you are turning this into a political debate. We're not.
Well, I don't think I'm doing
no,
that, Chair.
I'm
I
chairing
think
the meeting.
you started
Come
that.
to order, please. They're
Point of
they're
order.
very, very different things. We're not going to get into a political debate.
Point of
First
order.
of all, hang on. First of all, it's not okay to make wobbly decisions. That's how we got into trouble, and that's what the BVI was clear about. You can't have wobbly decision-making. This is an annual exercise, fees and charges. You can't have decisions which are made and then but some decision. If we're going to review the decision, I fully welcome it, but it shouldn't be done by officers perhaps talking to portfolio holders outside of the correct decision-making process. I would expect at the next cabinet meeting, cabinet to say, actually, we've had second thoughts, and this is now the process by which we're going to go through to review it. It can go back to the relevant scrutiny committee. There's a process for reviewing decisions, and I'm all for reviewing decisions. We shouldn't stick slavishly to a decision that actually we later think is wrong because we simply have to stand by our decisions. We should change, but we shouldn't learn about it at a scrutiny committee on an item that isn't really for debate, and there is no due process has not been upheld. That is the issue. Due process has not been upheld. That's something that we have been found wanting for in the past. It's not okay to sort of aim for a decision via a U-bend. It's okay if you get to the right decision in the end. That is where we've been found failing in the past. And this smacks of that to me if, you know, we're now being told that a decision that was very clearly passed by Cabinet now doesn't apply because somewhere via not a very clear process, a decision has been made to disapply. That is not how you make policy. So I don't have a problem with it being changed. I very much hope it is changed. It's how we found out about it and the process. You cannot have cabinet members and officers just deciding to disapply something that has gone through a decision-making process for expediency. And that appears to be what's happened here. Doesn't matter who is in control of the council, what party is in control. That's not an appropriate way of doing this.
Thank you, Chair. I would agree with you.
Chair, Holloway, no,
2
Councillor
seconds.
Holloway, no.
I would like to
we need
apologise for referring to it as a political decision. However, I did so in response to your aside that a political decision had been made and wanted to point out that that doesn't necessarily happen once or twice. It's a fairly regular thing.
There's nothing wrong with that. It was a political decision. We are politicians elected to make decisions, and the Cabinet has made a political decision. It's perfectly within its right to do that. It's perfectly in its right to make this decision and defend a decision. I'll disagree with lots of decisions that the Cabinet has made. Doesn't mean it's wrong because I disagree with it. What is at stake here, has happened, is the process by which it has been made, and that is a very poor process in my view. Thank you. Councillor Holloway.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. To get back to the paragraph that we're actually talking about that you've drawn attention to specifically, the bone of contention seems to be the words, not for profit, then there would not be a fee. That seems to be the bone, and there is a clear distinction between a community group that is not for profit and the travelling circus that turns up once a year and plants in black shots that comes en masse that clearly is for profit. And I can't think of any other wording if we were to turn around and say, look, this needs to be unpicked and withdrawn, how it could be cleared. On this particular one, it has to be to the discretion of the officers what they consider is profit, going to be a profitable event, for profit, or not for profit. And perhaps that should be something that when the application comes in, that's a box that needs to be ticked by the applicant. And it would be obvious, I would think, to someone that is running a big corporate event on the green, Aston Martin, for example, you know, you never know who might turn up. Or like you say, the one we both enjoy, Chairman, in Ockenden and indeed Corringham, where I represent. I think non-for-profit is the slight bone of contention, but I think it's the correct interpretation. I don't know how you could put it any other way, to be honest. But you're quite right to draw it to the attention of the committee. But I'd be absolutely staggered how we could be possibly able to recommend or unpick it.
Councillor Green, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I do. Can the officers answer? Did you expect to answer on these reports this evening, please?
I wasn't personally, no.
Then, Chair, while we're going through this, we talked about previously about member and officer relations. If we're going to ask questions on reports and on briefing notes, we should be making officers aware prior to the meeting. So, with that in mind, can we just move on, please?
No, we can't. I'll make it clear again. If there's something on the agenda, you turn your microphone off. If there's something on the agenda, no item is going to come to this agenda which we're just asked to know. If it's on the agenda, members will have the right to debate. And I expect to be, if officers are putting these items on the agenda, I expect them to be able to answer questions on them in a minute. I expect them to be able to ask questions on them. I've always said, in any committee I've been on, I abhor reports that are just to know. If they appear on the agenda and members have questions and they want to debate them, they will, and I expect officers to be able to answer them. On that point, do remember officers asking every member of this committee whether they would like a pre-meet, and no member said yes. I've had my pre-meet. You would have had the opportunity to meet with officers to discuss this agenda informally, and we could have had that then. So that point you made could have been made at the pre-meet, but no member of this committee responded to the invitation. So, I'm afraid this isn't the right place to be raising that. Refer to...
I was just trying to assist. I mean, I think we're all learning our new way of doing scrutiny, and I have to say, when I read the briefing notes, I read them as briefing notes that they were reporting back to this committee to some extent, what had happened with other recommendations of the committee, and I have to say my view was I wasn't expecting there to be a debate on them. However, you do make a valid point that if that is the expectation, but I think to be fair to the officers here, and they've tried to answer your questions as transparently as possible, that if there is an expectation that a matter is to be debated, then we would present a very different report, which would have more information and also be more transparent to not just the committee, but also the public who may wish to attend and make representations such as you've identified to make that clearer. So what I'd suggest, and obviously it's entirely up to the committee, is that we can either one, in respect to this specific issue about charging, and I hear the comments made, and there are different views, and I think it's absolutely accurate what non-for-profit means. We could be here all night discussing that, and I've seen that in other councils. If we could bring a report back to committee on that specific issue and what the proposals are about the implementation of that and who has delegated authority or otherwise to do that. And also outside of the meeting with the scrutiny team discuss this issue of the nature of briefing reports and what purpose they are, because I do think we need to transparently communicate that to all those people preparing those reports, but also to the public as to that these are subject matters for debate, because they may wish to come and view that or participate at your discretion.
Thank you for that. Apparently members of the public don't come to meetings, but I'm not being flippant. The officers they've given an answer and they've undertaken to go away and provide answers where they can't, so that's perfectly acceptable. I did say I don't, by all means come back with clarity on that specific item. It's clear to me what it means, so I don't particularly want clarity on it, but if other members do, that's fine. I don't think this is the right committee for that, though. I'll repeat, my concern is really more around the decisions that have been made since and the process that I think has been found wanting. And again, for clarity, just to be clear, if an item appears on the agenda, it might be in the mind of officers that they're bringing a briefing, but please be under no doubt, henceforth, that if we have any more meetings which I'm chair and an item appears on the agenda Whether it's called a briefing note or not, officers should be prepared to take questions and comments on it, because what we're not going to have in this committee where I'm chair are us just nodding at reports on the agenda and thinking, well, I can't ask a question, I can't make a comment that I'd like to because it's only a briefing paper. That is of no good to man nor beast, I don't think. So as long as we heed that. Enough said, we're moving on now to the next item. I am mindful of time, so we're moving on to item 8, which is the Corporate Plan Performance Management and Assurance Report, Q3 2024-25. Patrick, over to you.
Sarah Brown's going to introduce this report, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have made several improvements to the last quarterly update. Some of those include working with service areas to agree target information or tolerance for each of the metrics. So we've got 17 more metrics that now report that information. We think that's a really big improvement because that helps provide that context that you need to assess performance. Since we last saw you, we've also set up the Insight and Performance Board. That's an officer working group, and they provide a critical friend challenge to their peers about the data and appropriateness of targets. That officer group will meet again at the beginning of April. Following January scrutiny here and also feedback from Cabinet, we have been thinking about how we can improve the outcomes focus of the reports. And we are making plans to better align and merge the improvement and recovery updates alongside the corporate report, so we have more of a narrative assessment on our impact. And we are also committing to produce an annual report, and that will describe not only the successes in meeting the corporate plan for this year, but also reflect the improvement that we still need to make. January scrutiny also questioned how we would engage other scrutinies on issues that were in their subject matter. In the cover report to scrutiny, we've outlined that we think that corporate ONS is the most appropriate to consider this report because the primary objective is to make that assessment against the corporate plan. However, given the broad subjects that are contained within all the metrics and milestones, if corporate ONS consider there is a matter that requires more detailed scrutiny, that it is perhaps referred to those committees. And I think we've talked about an example this evening about when that happened last time on the recycling metric, and Place ONS received a more detailed briefing and discussion about that metric. So that's a way that could possibly work. And then just on the Appendix 1, an overview on that data. So the milestones are the pieces of activity that officers are working towards. So there is an acknowledgement that this update, there has been an impact on the devolution and local government reorganisation agenda. And on some of the milestones, officers are thinking again about how that might shape their work and what impact that might have, and they've covered some of that in the updates. Since last quarter, there's been some other delays that have been reported in that activity. Some of the reasons are due to staffing and available capacity, and others are with regard to needing additional information and reconsidering the direction of the project. But again, we've asked officers to provide that narrative where that has occurred. Overall, 68% of the milestones are on track. And in Q4, when we come back and report Q4, we will also report on the number that have been completed for this financial year. So this is just activity for this financial year. On the metrics, which is more about the data and the outputs, last quarter, we incorrectly reported the sickness metric. We showed that as green, and it should have been red. So that's been accurately reflected this quarter. There has been a slight improvement in that data this quarter, but it's still outside of the tolerance of that target. So it is noted as red, and there is some explanation about that as to why that is. However, overall, on the metrics, 57% are on target. and the ones that are off target, we've provided narrative about how we are planning to get them back on track and what areas of improvement we're looking to take. Where you note a direction of travel, that is a direction of travel from last year's data, just to provide that context. Hopefully that's an overview.
Thank you very much. Members have any questions? Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 45, where we're looking at the percentage of member inquiries responded within 10 working days. Now, hang on, sorry. The average response time for answering calls by the contact centre, it's worsened in terms of direction of travel and the last year's metrics. Do we know why? And have we got a plan on how we're going to mitigate this? And can I add something else onto that, please, if that's all right? Is also we've started to use AI systems in the contact centre, and I know it's early days, but I just wondered if we've got any feedback on performance and how we're going to be measuring it in Q4, and if that's going to be included in there. Thank you.
If I can come in as far as I can and help on that, working backwards, it's a really good question about the effectiveness of the AI, because the aim there is it diverts people away from our, what we call our human resources, not to make too great a distinction. But I don't know if we have data, but we will bring something back. And also, I think it's a really good question as to whether it's something we should be measuring as a performance target going forward, although at the moment it's a fairly limited rollout. Looking at the other two issues you raised, valid points that the most recent quarter has got worse, but both of those targets are still on target for the whole year. Because they're still on target and they're only slightly different than the previous quarter, I don't have any specific explanation for that, but obviously can ask the officers and reply back to members of the committee. But what I would say is, our target, for example, on average call time is less than 4 minutes, but we're currently averaging almost 100% better than that, around 2 minutes 25 year to date. And I think we also need to not beat ourselves up as a council too much, because I think most people's experience of calling private call centres or BT or EE is that you can be sitting waiting a lot longer than that before you get through to things. But I would say, with a note of caution there, it's not just about whether you get through or the phone gets answered, is does your query get answered first time? And that's the real prize that we're trying to work on with the development of improved customer services across the board. And just turning to the members' inquiries, yet again, it's only, it's year to date 93% against a target of 90%, but we're obviously always striving to make that better.
Councillor Green, then Councillor Fletcher.
Got a couple. Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. I've got one to raise around spend on agency staff. It hasn't seemed to have gone down this year. It actually seems to have got worse. What are we actually doing to actually proactively to decrease that amount?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. I mean, it really stands out. And what we are designing with a view to next year is an active campaign to reduce agency spend across the board via a number of different tactics that have been used by other councils. There's lots of different some are a bit carrot, some are a bit more stick, but we can easily happily bring that back, what those proposals are, to drive those down, and there will be an element of giving targets to people. But we know I've worked in a number of councils, and there's always lots of different reasons why agency staff are used. Some of them are simply laziness on the part of the organisation, because it's easier to get agency staff in place. In other cases, it's because they're really hard to fill posts in specialist areas. We need to do the analysis, but we're certainly going to be bringing forward a corporate-wide strategy for reducing that, because it absolutely right stands out, and it costs us money. And also, I think, really importantly, if we're employing agency staff, it means hopefully local people aren't getting permanent jobs with the council and developing their careers. So there's a real holistic strategy around that we need to look at as well.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing that in the future. The only other thing I'd like to talk about is the number of officers completing writing training. It says the initial report training started in 2023, and a couple of sessions have had to be cancelled along with people not turning up. I see here that yourself, Dan, have made it mandatory. If they then decide not to bother turning up, what are we going to do?
Yeah, I try not to take this personally, but people are not turning up to my training in the numbers that they're signing up to it. They probably heard from the first session. I do open it by saying it's 2 hours of your life you'll never get back. But it's absolutely, I think, to be fair, a significant number of officers. We don't have that many officers who actually have to write reports, but I think the real issue is people signing up and not turning up, and we'll make a greater effort there, but it's reflecting badly on me, so I do take that bit personally. But thanks for asking the question, if that helps. And just to say, we had a discussion at the Governance Recovery Board. This may be something that members are interested in from the other side, as in what to expect from a report that's presented in front of you in terms of quality as well, so you get the kind of, so you know what questions you should be asking as well as the obviously the questions that you do ask. If that, and so always open to doing that.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Fletcher and then Councillor Kerrin.
Thank you, Chair. Mind if mine are more comments than questions? First off, what I like, and I think we're getting better at this, is the two things really, the commentary, particularly around the reds, and I've noticed commentary that either explains why it's not as bad as it looks, and also commentary that says what we're doing about it if it is. So that's great. I also like this direction of travel. It took me a moment to realise what I was looking at, but I do. I mentioned earlier dynamic reporting, and yes, I'd like to know if a thing is red, but it's slightly less red than last year. Great. Still want to see it delivered, but you know. That's fantastic. So I like those. I guess what my big request would be, I look at any report from the point of view of what the reader is going to want, what they're going to want to see. And I guess a corporate performance report, people are going to want to see how are people performing, what's going well, what's not going quite so well, and what we're doing about it. First and foremost, teaching migraine to suck eggs, that's obvious. But the first 9 pages you have to wade through on this are really about how the report was written. It's a report about the report. And I think we fall into the trap sometimes of thinking we need to explain to this audience or to whoever our audience is how we arrived at this. Actually, no, they're not interested, to be quite honest. There's certainly there's some great stuff in here about how important the report is, why it's important. Yeah, great. But actually what people really want to see is, well, what's happening? Where are we doing well? Where are we not doing so well? And what are we doing to improve? For me, particularly, the exec summary. What I'd expect to see in an exec summary is first and foremost, front and centre, overall, we are doing well in most of our areas. As the chair mentioned, that might in itself lead to some questions. Great. Those are the questions you want. So, how are we doing? You're obviously not going to go into detail about the reds or whatever, but that high-level detail about how we're doing, what percentage of our performance metrics are on target and what are not, and broadly, how we approach dealing with those that are not. That kind of information, for me, is what I'm looking for. Not why it's important again, how we arrived at it, again. No, that's great, but it's probably an appendix. Whereas what's actually in the appendix is the stuff I really want to get into. So it's just really a request to, and it may, I hope it doesn't run against the way that people are being shown how to write reports, but I'll take the risk. You know, for me, a report that actually starts with the outcomes will be a report that I will read with a lot more alacrity and a lot more ease than one that sort of takes a while to warm up. So, just a request from my part.
Do you want to respond to that, or?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that's incredibly helpful, and you're quite right. What's demonstrated to me from the early part, from the conversation we've had this evening, is that we do need to be clearer that actually, when we look at the metrics here, for example, over a quarter of them are off track. So we think about seas of green, we think about the way we look at things. Actually, we should be up front and centre to say that on metrics, a quarter of them are off track. And we need to be clear about the difference between metrics and milestones. You're quite right, and we look to iterate these reports, and we will take that feedback on board for the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kerrin, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. On page 48, I'm going to draw attention to the two milestones that are in red, and not because they're in red, and it's because I actually can see why they're in red, because of the all these sort of waiting for the news about devolution and local government reorganisations. But what I wondered, is there any way we could be kind of proactive, even while we're waiting for government decision, to have some milestones in place? Oh, it's on page 48. You know, have some milestones in place that we can proactively do while we're preparing for devolution, and, you know, anything. So I can see why it's red, because we're at the mercy of what's coming from Westminster. But are there any milestones we could put in place for ourselves to be sort of proactive and leading the conversation on devolution and the next steps for Thurrock?
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. You're quite right that the impact on these has been because of local government reorganisation and devolution. I think very quickly what officers are doing now is coming to a conclusion about what is required for the lifetime of this council as it exists, and the delivery of those services out through devolution and local government reorganisation. And we need to be clearer as we look at our milestones and metrics and refresh them about when we refer to service delivery and the continuity of excellent service delivery, and what we need to do in terms of readiness for local government reorganisation and devolution. Those things will overlap in some incidences, but in other ways they won't. And what they both come down to is how we marshal ourselves and how we brigade ourselves as a team of officers. And what we need to do quickly here is work on an operating model that works for both delivery of local government reorganisation, which will become clearer over the summer, but also the delivery of services. That's been something that's been picked up by the Commissioner's last report, and we know we need to focus on. And we'll be very keen over the summer to bring to this committee both a refresh of the corporate plan, but also a refresh of work that looks at the new operating model about how we'll do both of those things.
Thank you. And just, I know Councillor Fletcher commented on how the report was laid out. I do a lot of RAG rating and things at work myself, and to be honest, it's not so much the colour that I'm interested in, it's the commentary that goes behind it. That's why when I brought up the ones in red, it was like, oh, it's obvious the ones that are in red, you know, but that's not why I chose them. It's because of the commentary that went with it. So the only thing I'd say for future reports, just if we could have even more commentary to give us even more context behind what's happening, and you know, there's different shades of red and orange, and you know, I'm sure some of these greens would be light green rather than dark green if you were looking at how much, how further into it is. So more on the commentary would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. That's incredibly helpful, and I think your point on more context of the commentary is really interesting, because actually what we're driving at there is a much more outcome-focused conversation about what the commentary should be, and therefore what is the outcome. And what we're going to do for the next year as this matures is we're going to bring in the improvement and recovery plan into the same documentation. What that does is mean that the outcomes we have agreed and that you see at full council for the improvement journey will become part of this document, and we will have a better conversation about the outputs in terms of the work people are doing, but also the outcomes that those outputs lead to. And as this matures, we'll work with you to see how we can best demonstrate that on paper.
Thanks, Patrick. Because I did go to my briefing the other day, you and I had a discussion around this item, and we've had a lot of discussion here tonight, and I made very clear that in my personal view, the corporate plan has to very much capture how, what outcomes we're going to aim for through the devolution process. We need to be able to measure whether we're adequately resourced, whether we are as capable as the other local authorities, all of those things. So we need to agree very, very quickly, because it's a fast-moving process, what it is we want to measure, and then start doing it. But I think we've had that debate, and you've given us some assurances. But equally, to flip it on its head, reading through this report, quite a lot of the targets and the measurements, there's lots of commentary about how devolution has sort of thrown it off kilter, and we're not quite sure what direction to take with it. So I suppose equally what we need is an assurance that we don't use, I know devolution and local government reorganisation creates a lot of uncertainty, but we can't kind of pause what we're doing because of that uncertainty. How are we going to make sure that we don't start taking our foot off the gas, if you like, and saying, well, the council won't exist in 2 years' time. There's this uncertainty around devolution and local government. So we'll just put lines in each measurement saying, oh, well, we're pausing this. We don't know. How are we going to make sure that that doesn't throw us off track and we don't continue to embed this and seek, better services?
Thank you very much, Councillor. I would like to steal a phrase from the Chief Executive, who's not here this evening, but who said today in a forum that Thurrock needs to be match fit for the future, match fit for devolution, match fit for local government reorganisation. And I think you've hit the nail on the head when you say we cannot use this as an excuse and we cannot use this as a moment to pause. We actually need to be at our best when we're in conversations with our partners on devolution and our possible and future partners on local government reorganisation across Essex. The timing of this comes helpfully because very soon it will be the beginning of the new financial year, and that allows us an opportunity to rethink how we are reporting for that new financial year, and it allows us an opportunity to refresh this in light of local government reorganisation and devolution. So it allows us to think about the milestones and the metrics that need to change, but also, as you've raised, the different things we'll need to pull in from the devolution and reorganisation programme to demonstrate to members, to the public and to this committee that we have the right grasp of the right issues, and we are working at the pace with our partners that we want to. We are very quickly now, after the various inputs of this week that we've also touched on, we will very quickly move into a new phase of that work with our partners that allows us to adapt this document to that reality. And very much look forward over the coming months to work with the committee, all members, to ensure that the milestones and metrics for the next year adequately reflect both where the executive, where officers think we should be, but indeed what this committee would like to see in terms of the quarterly reporting.
Thank you. And just a couple of quick comments, questions from me, because I'm mindful of time. I said it earlier, and I've said it in other meetings. I've always had that concern about how stretching, how challenging some of our targets are. I think when you leave it to I know services are best placed to come up with how service should be measured. I mean, if you're not an officer who works in a particular service, it isn't your expertise. How are you best placed to sort of provide some critical advice around what the target should be? But I think when you leave it to services to decide what their targets are, there's a risk that they're not so much marking their own homework, they're writing the questions. And you've said in the report that you'll be going through a process now of looking at those targets again to see whether they are sufficiently stretching. But if it's back to the services themselves to look at that, how are we sure they're not just taking the easy options? I'm sure that, you know, the majority of service leads will want honest targets, but there's also that risk that actually we might look for the most easiest targets to achieve. So when it's back to the services to relook at those targets to satisfy us that they are stretching enough, where's the oversight, if you like, to make sure that they are coming up with honest, stretching, challenging targets?
The oversight sits in Sarah's team, if you don't mind. Councillor, I'll bring in Sarah Brown.
So we've set up the Officer Insight and Performance Board, which is already providing some challenge to officers as a group, and we do that based on benchmarking data, the outturn from the previous year, to understand how they arrived at their target. That is an ongoing process, but when we come to review the data from this financial year, we will also take that through to SLT and to DMTs. So the exec directors will have a view in looking at those targets and feeding back, and SLT as a group will also be able to challenge each other. So we've built in a few ways to try and have that wider peer challenge on that data.
The other thing I'd just add is that because we've made changes within my team to bring business intelligence and the way we use data into one function within the council, the responsibility for data about services and how they're delivered doesn't now necessarily sit in silos. It sits in a central team. That now has a head of service that's looking across the whole council and allows us to also provide some check and challenge within that team and their understanding of the nature of targets across the organisation, so that as services are setting them, we're also putting something in at a corporate level that provides a level of oversight that we think the correct process has been followed.
Thank you for that reassurance. Any other questions from members or comments before we move on? No? Okay, thanks Patrick, thanks Sarah for that. So we are moving on to item 9, which is quarter 3 revenue and capital reports. I think let's take a look at the recommendations. I'm not a slave to recommendations because I think we cover them in our debates, to be honest, but if it pleases you, we'll go to them. On page 30, we note the quarterly performance update. I think we made that clear in our commentary. Consider recommending any areas of concern within the remits of place and people overview and scrutiny committees to the chairs of those respective committees. I don't think anything came out that we specifically want to refer. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have the quarter 3 forecast revenue and capital outturn report. So that's obviously to the end of December. And the revenue position for the operating budget, which is the service pressure, shows a 991k overspend against the budget, and that's a reduction in the net service expenditure of 1.731 million from quarter 2. Now, this reduction, 736k was due to a revision of salary forecasts to reflect the actual pay award. So we were forecasting 4% previously, and then the actual pay award came out to 2.5%. So we adjusted salary forecasts across the board for that actual pay award. The balance was actually due to deep dives on all the forecast areas, primarily in the Place Directorate, so that we could reflect the realistic position for the year end. And it was across Place Directorate, it was income, expenditure across the board. We were adjusting the forecasts. So For the refresh of the MTFS, as reported to Cabinet in February, that resulted in the Council's estimated capitalisation directive requirement in the current financial year being increased to 96.42 million. And against that Council's net position at Q3, the overspend is 157k, representing 1.739 million reduction on Q2. So work is now progressing for the year end, and we will ensure that that 157k overspend is mitigated by the year end. The following areas of pressure do continue to exist, however. Increases in client numbers and unit costs in certain areas in adult social care due to increased complexity of care package needs, particularly older people's residential and nursing care, physical disabilities and learning disability supported living packages. The continued pressure on the DSG with a forecast of 822k overspend at Q3 and a projection of a DFG deficit of 20.201 million by the end of 2028-29. And that does actually reflect the national position on the high needs block and challenges faced in meeting demand, complexity of need and price increases. However, the government have now suggested that they are due to release a white paper in late spring, which will hopefully provide a solution to send pressures across all of local government, as well as much needed legal changes. So we much await that white paper. And for children's social care, increased complexity of need for some young people has resulted in additional support being provided, with increased costs across all service types between Q2 and 3, particularly in external residential and unregulated placements. And the ongoing shortage of local social and affordable private housing options for young people continues to add pressures. So although we're facing quite a substantial reduction in the overspend position between Q2 and Q3, there are still pressures and we are working towards year end. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Councillor Howden.
Thanks, Chair. The community development work that moved out of adult services and into the chief exec's unit, I'm a bit concerned that quite a lot of the chief exec's unit is in the red at the moment at table 3. One of the reasons that community development always sat with adult services was because it allowed us to merge the hardcore statutory social care work with things like social prescribing, local area coordination, using community assets to drive down the actual complement of formal social care that needed to be deployed. The commentary in adult social care is that we've achieved an underspend, which is fantastic, but client numbers are up, and more concerningly, client numbers specifically in disabilities and physical disabilities and learning disabilities are both up. These are overwhelmingly the cohorts that benefit from community-based work, from community assets that support them. So can you give me reassurance, A, that with community development now sat with the Assistant Chief Exec's office, that budget won't be raided for overspends in his directorate, but separately, the underspend that we currently enjoy in adults is not going to be put at risk because adults no longer has its direct hands on the levers for some of the community assets that it was able to deploy.
The community development budget is actually the libraries service, even though the title is slightly weird. So as part of a restructure, that libraries function was actually moved.
Right, so it's none of the LS coordination?
No, it's
stuff.
all libraries.
Wonderful. I'm satisfied. But Robert, you haven't said anything all night, so...
So give me the opportunity. Thank you very much. Just to reassure you that actually from a working perspective, we are one council And so, and it's something I really push very strongly within the Directorate. We continue to work really closely with the communities team, both in the Civic Centre and actually through community-led support teams, and they're engaged with working-age adults, older people, and people, and people with physical disability and sensory impairment. So there's strong links which were always in place when communities within the Directorate are absolutely retained, and we work very closely, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 99 of the agenda, top of the page, it talks about legal disrepairs claims. And I was just concerned, I might have missed it in the report, just wondered, have we got like a budget or an estimated budget of, in case we get any claims, or how are we monitoring this, and how are we, if we do get a claim, how are we going to finance it, and how robust are our plans to deal with anything like this that might come down the line?
Anybody?
Yeah, so within the HRA budget that was presented as part of next year's budget, if you remember, as part of the budget setting, with the legal disrepairs cost, we've allowed enough within the HRA budget setting in the overall balance to allow for quite a substantial amount of legal disrepairs costs. And it is a substantial element of the HRA budget. So we estimate that based on quite a substantial modelling of future disrepair costs, and make sure that we allow enough within the HRA budget within the overall balancing to zero, which is what the HRA has to balance to. We also have HRA reserves that we retain specifically for reasons of the HRA, that if there are legal disrepairs, can't get my words out today, legal disrepairs, then we are covered for those as well.
Councillor Kent has raised a question on a point that I was also going to raise. My interest is really prevention is better than cure. Again, I appreciate it's probably better answered by somebody in the housing team, but rather than bracing ourselves for these claims and setting up a slush fund for them, what are we doing to mitigate them? That's the assurance that sort of I would want to be seeking as a committee. When you see here that some councils are facing claims of up to £10 million, that's something we really can't afford. And frankly, if Thurrock Council felt it doesn't exist in 2 or 3 years' time, a housing stock still will. So what are we doing to mitigate rather than cure, or be prepared for?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the key things that comes with stock management is our ability to access our properties, get to know our residents living in them. We are embarking on a new approach to engaging with our tenants. We're engaging in a new sort of whole property check-in, which takes into account both the residents within the property and the property themselves. So it's no longer just going to visit a property for one thing or the other. Through this approach, we're targeting areas where maybe we haven't been in a property for a little while, maybe there haven't been repairs for a little while, maybe things have been seeming stable, but some of these are risk factors. So we're trying to get to these properties where maybe we haven't had eyes on them, trying to identify if there are works required and get to them before we get to a position where there are legal disrepair claims. That's one way of doing things. Another way that we're looking at is increased levels of resident engagement in general. So some new panels and boards and focus groups. And the last thing that I'll touch on, actually, something came out today that's being publicised and promoted by the government, which is about encouraging tenants to raise complaints at an earlier phase. So we're being asked to promote this, as we do with the Housing Ombudsman. We have flyers up and posters up, but to encourage people to talk to us as soon as possible, raise their concerns, raise their complaints, raise it with the Housing Ombudsman, go through the proper channels before we get to a point of properties in disrepair. So all of those things we're trying to do.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. I think it might be possible to diagnose even earlier than that. A couple of years ago, when I was last a councillor, we had a paper brought to the Housing ONS committee, as it was then, about damp black spots, if you like, for the borough. I remember that because my ward was one of them. Having that information should allow us to identify, before tenants even start talking to us, some of the likely areas where damp is going to become a problem. And, you know, as you're more aware than I am, the later in the process that's picked up, the more it costs. So are we doing, given that, I mean, you're shaking your head, you obviously know about these black spots, what are we doing to try and identify that problem and deal with that problem before it becomes a tenant's complaint?
Yeah, thank you. Colleagues in the repairs service might be able to provide a more full response to you. We are trying to be more proactive. We have featured a question about damp and mould in our general tenant survey to ask the question. But you're absolutely right. We have got information about where properties have had these types of issues. Maybe the archetypes, maybe the locations. Are there areas in the borough that are more prevalent? Are there particular types of construction that are more prevalent? And trying to target work in those particular areas. It isn't a guarantee that one property might have it so another one does. We do rely on that engagement with our residents. But a more detailed response on what we're doing with damp and mould, I'm sure we could provide to you. So you know what we are doing proactively rather than just waiting for a tenant to come and talk to us about the problem they're experiencing.
Thanks. I think that would probably be very interesting to my colleagues still in Bellas and Ockenden.
Thanks for that. Couple of quick questions from me. Page 91 at 4.5.3 mentions a historic debt for Natis, quite a considerable debt. As far as you can we have some more explanation of how this debt has arisen and why it's not recoverable? Could you just use your microphone, please? Thank you.
So part of it has been paid. There is a balance outstanding. It was for some fraud work that was carried out previously. And I can provide more information in writing to councillors, if that's okay.
I'd like it. I don't know if other members would. I appreciate there's probably sensitivities around that. So if we just could have a very brief explanation of it, that would be good. Yeah. Thank you. And page 102, we haven't realised anything like the target for moving traffic offences. That I think that's really. I appreciate that these things always have teething problems, and obviously it looks like the equipment isn't geared up to realise that income. This is not at all about hampering motorists. We know the area where it's focused, and there's a real problem there, and a real reason we need to carry out enforcement activity there. But enforcing moving traffic offences is a real opportunity for this council, not only because it does allow us to have an income that we can then reinvest in the services that residents want us to do. It's not about making money, but it's also about solving problems that we get complaints about as councillors all the time, like road gridlock, because people habitually block yellow box junctions and that kind of thing. It's not about hammering motorists, but it is something that I was very keen to see rolled out when it was first conceived. And we haven't raised anything like the expected income. Can we have again some explanation around why that is and what we're doing to resolve it? Because it's as I say, it's not just about income. It's an opportunity to address some really sort of pressing highways problems in the borough.
I'll get a briefing. That's sorted.
Okay, thank you. No more questions from me. Anybody else? I think, just to say, I think the direction of, we know there's still pressures, we know there's still challenges, but the direction of travel is a good one. I think we have to recognise that. And once again, I think we have to shine a light on adult social care. Fantastic work there, and we shouldn't miss an opportunity to say how proud we are of what they do. It's we spoke earlier about a failing council, but there's an example of how to run a service, a very challenging service. So, excellent. Happy. The recommendations. I will, for Lucy's sake, make reference to the recommendations, but they're really to note and comment, and I think we've noted and commented, so I don't propose to go through all of them. And are we happy that we've met all the recommendations? Excellent, thank you. So the next item is item 10, work programme, which is in the agenda. This is our last meeting of the municipal year, isn't it? So in terms of adding stuff to the work programme, I suppose we would be proposing things for the next municipal year, unless, I mean, the option is still there, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, when we decided to cancel an earlier meeting, it was on the proviso that we could hold one in April if there were items to be discussed. So, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Where it's got cabinet forward plan items for corporate ONS, should they be coming to us before May or after May?
I'll defer to what, there's certainly that opportunity, isn't there? We can have a meeting in April if we wanted one.
If there's substantive business to transact, and we'd have to seek advice from the monitoring officer as well. But if members would like a meeting or a briefing, and the monitoring officer agrees, then yes.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher, did you indicate?
Yeah, I was just thinking that following tomorrow, I think the committee might want to take some time to think about what kind of extra or slightly changed content we want in future meetings. It would seem an ideal opportunity if we can have it.
So, okay, should we have a conversation then outside of the meeting with all members of the committee to see whether there is any, you know, we do want to have a meeting, there are things that we consider, or even an informal briefing? Yeah.
I think we should, as chair of the committee, I think we should leave it to you and your direction, and if you think it's worth it, let's do it.
Okay, thank you for that, but I am keen to hear, I'm not the committee, and I'm keen that if there are things that, if you think there's a good reason to have a meeting, then that's probably because there's a good reason to. So collectively, if there are views on that, please do share them. Councillor Howden?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. One thing I'd be interested in is financial implications of the different variants of 3 or 5 unitary authorities, because both would affect what the Thurrock Council tax base suddenly needs to become in a new reality. So if we're lumped in with areas that have got very low amounts of self-funders in social care like we do, our council tax would suddenly need to be dramatically higher than if we had a more stable, logical unitary authority. So if we had a 5 unitary authority model, I dare say our taxes would need to be a lot higher. So having an assessment of those risks and options, I think would be quite useful.
Yeah, I agree. So provisionally then, shall we say we would like a meeting in April to have some kind of discussion or briefing around that, and then if there are other things, we can add them on?
Yeah, that's fine. If it's specifically around devolution or local government reform, it might be easier to have kind of a briefing on that, but we can have this conversation offline, whether, you know, in kind of the format and what items that members wish to see.
Excellent, okay. Item 12, recommendations tracker. Is that just to note, or do you want to say a few words on that?
Really, just to say that it's a new, it's a new thing that's been added following updates to the Constitution, and it just outlines the recommendations that have come to corporate ONS, and then if there's any kind of outstanding or follow-ups to that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, my clock tells me we're 3 minutes over time, so the monitoring officer is going to have to tell me off, I'm afraid. So bearing in mind we've reached that time, if there's nothing else, I'll close the meeting and thank everybody for their attendance. Thanks to officers for coming, and you've answered some very difficult questions. We're grateful. Nothing I've heard has sort of, suggests that you're not on top of things, and obviously if the questions are not designed to trip anybody up, and I hope you don't feel that you've had a hard time, but you've provided some really good answers, some good reassurance, so thanks everybody for your contributions. Thanks. And the meeting is closed at 9:33.